The first 3 weeks of the eruption here in Hawaii, crazy things would happen in the middle of the night. A new fissure would open up and it would threaten a new neighborhood. Thousands of people were evacuated from their homes. I started the Hawaii Tracker Facebook group to help people understand what's going on and get their questions answered.
Hey, how's it going? We're live. This is Fissure 20.
We had hundreds of people all throughout the neighborhoods sending in videos, articles, and images. We spend a lot of time making sure the accurate information gets out.
This is live. Still lava moving.
They weren't just sharing a story, they were helping their neighbor. If a family was being evacuated, my group would just jump in and help out. So it was huge. They were watching out for each other.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for coming. Thank you for the support from everybody.
As we go through this, we're growing closer together as a community. When tragedies like this strike, you really realize how much you need each other.
We are the Hawaiian Volcano Education and Resilience Institute, HVERI for short. A lot of people know us from the 2018 eruption of Kilauea in the Lower East Rift Zone. Working under Hawaii Tracker on the Facebook group. Since then, we've been trying to carry on and take the lessons, the hard lessons that were learned during that eruption and try and prepare for the next major disaster that comes to our island.
Yeah, and so we do that through two different programs. One is volcano education, and the other part is digital resilience, which we address through online groups on social media. So the way the two programs work together is that the social media networks end up being a distribution pathway for all the information. And having that network in place means we can provide more than just volcano education, but any other preparedness information as well.
What we were working for really came about in the Mauna Loa eruption in 2022. Within hours of that eruption starting, we had the mayor, Mitch Roth, we had USGS HVO Ken Hahn on the stream trying to help flush out a little bit of the ongoing because it's so new. It's completely different from our previous major eruption, which was 2018.
One of the things that Talmadge and I were talking about was how do we deal with social media? And it was something we needed to figure out and get right. Our job is to get information to the public and make sure that the public get it as well as possible and as correctly as possible. When Philip and Dane started coming to and live streaming the meetings, it was great because we were reaching more people than we normally would. So when the eruption actually happened, we had this relationship. The interviews we did during the eruption, the most fun ones were the ones with Philip and Dave because they were more relaxed, and we knew we were getting to the local community, and people were asking questions. So those were the best. I think I just want to really give a shout out to those guys and how we worked as a team on this eruption. It really worked out well, and we got to a lot of people we wouldn't have normally gotten.
Aloha, everybody. I'm geologist Philip Ong, here with Dane DuPont from HVERI, the Hawaiian Volcano Education and Resilience Institute. This is your Thursday, June 13th, 2024 Hawaiian Volcano Update. The eruption on the Southwest Rift Zone was very brief. It is over. It's not erupting anymore, but we've been tracking the aftermath of it, and that'll be the focus of our presentation this week. So before I get into it, Dane, how are you this week?
Oh, doing good, doing good. Yeah, just paying attention up there. Been seeing the inflation and all the subtle changes on top of that. And yeah, just kind of wondering what it all means at this point and how long we have until we see lava again.
Yeah, on the one hand, it seems like it could come back fairly quick, but on the other hand, it maybe
Kind of
not.
confusing.
Yeah, it's hard to decipher what's going on exactly. Well, we don't have all the answers or anything like that, but we can certainly lead a discussion and share the USGS signals and monitoring data and all of that. And so that's what we'll do. Dane will be taking questions, leading a discussion on chat. Thanks for doing that, Dane. And we'll be handling with Lou on our back end here. We'll be going through doing 2 halves of the show today. And starting off with our Hawaiian Volcano summary. Anything you want to add before we get into it, Dane?
No, I think we can dive right in.
All right. So let's start switching our screen around and get ready for our Hawaiian Volcano summary. Okay. So in our Hawaiian Volcano summary this week, Kilauea Southwest Rift erupted briefly last week, and its fissures continue to spew gas and glow for several days after that. But now the glow has ceased and the gas emissions are back to background. Since gas was a major impact from eruption that produced fog island-wide, the air has been a lot better on the island over the last few days here. On the actual eruption site, there was tremor persistent for several days after the eruption was over, suggesting that magma continued to intrude that southwest rift zone past the eruption site for several days after that. And this satellite image that you can see here is showing the progression of the dike past the fissures an extra 4 miles down the rift there. So that's the range of effect of the events last week. It was a combination of an eruption and an intrusion, with the intrusion spanning a much greater distance down the rift here. If we look at the S1 camera time-lapse since the eruption, we can see that over the first few nights, there is glow that diminishes every night. Gas is still being emitted as the magma is flowing underneath that rift zone area. And then the glow dies off, and so does the gas by about 4 or 5 days after that. And that's the view from the S1 web camera out in the Southwest Rift. I'll let it play all the way to today. You can see how quiet it is and how little gas is coming out at present here now. Oh, it just looped its way back there. All right. So looking at the ground tilt, this is a Sand Hill station. The eruption occurred on June 3rd here. And following the eruption, we had a big deflation of the ground that lasted only a couple of days before inflation resumed at a fairly high rate here. This is a gain of perhaps 60, 70 microradians in the last week. So a sizable increase that has recently mellowed a little bit here within the last couple of days. Still, this is showing that the volcano is still filling with magma and it's still pressurizing and tilting the ground out. And the intrusion and eruption that occurred last week only did a little bit of work to relieve that pressure that still continues to build underground. If we look at the earthquake rates for the last month, this was the prequel to our eruption. We had earthquakes diminish for the next few days to a pretty low level, and then resumed with another pulse a few days later. And earthquakes have built back up fairly quickly in the summit area around the South Caldera and the Kauai fault zone, Upper East Rift, just like before. Looking at the map, you can see here, I'm going to zoom it in to this area, showing the South Caldera cluster a little bit into the Southwest Rift connector, Upper Southwest Rift, and the Upper East Rift as well. And these are the areas that border the Kauai fault zone, as we've discussed for many months now. That's the story here on Kilauea. On Mauna Loa, it's been fairly quiet here. Earthquake rates over the last year. So they're still pretty low at about 20 earthquakes per week. And that's the most exciting thing happening on Mauna Loa right now. Mauna Loa is still inflating, filling with magma. Occasionally, we have a pulse of deep earthquakes like this one that occurred in late 2023. But really, compared to the build up to the eruption in 2022, Mauna Loa is very quiet at present. And that's our Hawaiian volcano summary for this week. So let me come next to our volcanic hazards. As VOG was impactful for the last week, and we'll, as usual, rely on a VOG measurement and prediction project, the VMAP, and their forecast dashboard. Today looks like this. The most recent value of sulfur dioxide being emitted from the rift zone area was 350 tons per day, which is above the background rate of less than 100 or so. So it's elevated, but it certainly has come down quite a bit because it started off at 15,000 tons per day on the 3rd, went down to 5,500 on June 4th, down to 400 on June 6th, and 350 since then. So it tailed off after the first 3 days and is more slowly tailing off now. It's still above background, but approaching background fairly quickly here. See, the VOG is being carried in the nearby areas to Volcano, but also downwind into Kau and around to the upper reaches of South Kona as well. Looking at the maps we have in a national park, everything is green around the summit area. Although if you're a sensitive individual, then certainly be on alert and watch for park signage. If we look at the charts, everything is in the green. When I looked a little bit earlier, I did note that at Uikahuna, there was a little spike of SO2 earlier yesterday. So it is possible that the winds change and it can blow the gas into some of these areas where visitors frequent. So everything else is in the green in the national park. Looking at the state map, everything is, let's see, maybe in the green here, statewide, but we also like to look at the citizen science monitoring network of purple air, where unlike last week, everything is mostly in the green here. Pahala is showing a little orange down here, being closest to that site, perhaps, maybe just downwind. So that is our gas update today. And next we will cover our earthquakes because they're, oh, this is not what we want to show, okay, because they are not as dense as they were last week here. So here's a map of earthquakes for the last 2 days on Kilauea. This is looking a little small, but we'll deal with it here. But just a few earthquakes around the summit area and a few on the edge of the Upper East Rift here. So while that map of earthquakes over the last week is showing quite a lot of activity, if I pull it back to the last 2 weeks, that'll include the eruption. But the event over the last week without the eruption still includes a lot of this area, but it's slowed down quite a bit to today. And here's a comparison to 2 weeks ago with the build up to eruption as well. These are colored by depth. So all these reds are in the shallow zones, whereas these blue are the deep Pahala earthquakes over here. So if we zoom out to the full map, you can see that the majority of activity of earthquakes on the island is around Kilauea, near the surface, deeper down under Pahala, and you have some other background settling events scattered across the island, mostly on the west side here, one in Hilo. So those are the earthquake maps by depth. We also like to look at this one by time. So we can see that the largest one within the last week was a 3.4 earlier today, right down here at 4.5 miles depth under that South Caldera area. If we go to the most recent one, newest first, then also in that same area. So both the largest and the most recent ones, even though their numbers aren't great, you can see it's certainly active in here and moving things around. And it is noteworthy that during the move of magma from the summit to the eruption site on June 3rd, there was very little seismicity earthquakes that tracked that moving out. So it could be that the magma could be moving through some of these areas without as many earthquakes. And that's why looking at the tremor is important. But as of the last report, the USGS says the tremor is also back to background levels as well. So we're still waiting to see what emerges here as far as the next monitoring signal that's convincing of something changing. For now, we know magma is building up in this area and adjusting underground as it often does. And those are the earthquakes. Next, we'll come to our visual observations. And I thought I would start off with a few time-lapse clips. This one is from the KP camera, which is the one up on Mauna Loa looking down to the Southwest Rift. And I thought I would just play just the nighttime compilations first. So here we are, the eruption is going to start right there in the middle. And I've just cut out all the days, so you just see the glow diminishing over time with the effect of weather also mixed in there. But you can see that within a few days that the glow is all the way gone from that view there. Similar thing from the S1 camera. There it is. You can see how the glow really did not last very long at strength anyways. And the S2 camera, similarly showing that glow decreasing there. You see a little bit of a flashing where I've left a little bit of a daybreak coming in, so you can tell the days are flashing by here. So those are the nighttime views. Seeing the glow diminish there, it's a little more interesting to look at the daytime views because you can see a little bit more of the gas plume. So once again, from up in Mauna Loa, daytime view, eruption sites down here. You can see the plume moving around a little bit. Let's see if I can play that when I get in and zoom it in here, but it looks like that did not last with gas very long either. So let's zoom it in and give it one more shot here. See a little change in the wind. But otherwise, the gas let out that massive volume over the first 3 days or so, and then seemed to diminish. A little closer view. Here's an S1 camera. Daytime view of that gas plume blowing around. More intense there for the first few days. Blows right over the camera there for a couple hours. And then now it's fairly clear, a little bit coming out from right in there, but not much at all. That's the S1, and let's play you guys the S2 camera. It's like a different view. The fissures over here on this side now. Gas coming across the area. And once again diminishing. So yeah, this is the aftermath of that eruption last week, this first eruption of 2024 on Kilauea Southwest Rift. Now add one more, this MITD camera, which only caught glow a little bit at night, so it wasn't really worth showing, but the daytime view was a little bit more, shows a little bit more of the landscape, Mauna Loa in the background, and shows this gas plume blowing downwind from right to left across the screen here while it was there, because as you can see, once again, it did not last more than a few days. Still was impactful for people island-wide with the VOG that it produced, so just we can appreciate how brief it actually was there for that reason. Okay, let's move on to some of the photo and video chronology. The USGS has released a set of photographs of the aftermath as well. So we'll look at some of these. We saw some of these last week where the geologist is walking alongside the flow, and you can see how thin the flow actually is. We're looking at 3, 5, 6 feet maybe in areas, but overall it's not building a shell and inflating and swelling to be 10s or 20s of feet thick, like you saw in Kalapana time. So there was that one. We saw them measuring the gas plume from afar and measuring fountain heights and locations with laser rangefinders, as well as looking at the rocks through hand lenses to see how crystal rich they are and whether this magma may have actually been, as they suspect, remnants of the intrusion from January 31st of this year that filled that same area, caused all the ground cracking, and may have been flushed out by this most recent sequence of intrusion and eruption. So, all right, we've seen those, and we can look in a little bit more detail at some of these other ones here. There was an aerial overflight over the area. So let's look at some of those here. Let me switch over to our full screen view. There was a geologist, Kendra Lynn, was hiking on Mauna Loa, and this is at the Red Hill Cabin looking back down towards the Southwest Rift on June 4th. They afterwards still seeing a lot of that gas coming out, as that's still within that 3-day window of most effusive emissions. Nice landscape view there with Mauna Loa flows in the foreground. Here we have an aerial view of the upper fissures, fissures 1 and 2. I believe that one is 1 and that one is 2, those little pads of lava there. They flow downhill to the south, but you can also see a series of ground cracks, in this case, on the downhill side of this eruption, right? And what's interesting here is it looks like some of this cracking is actually cracking through this flow. It's hard to see exactly from this photograph, but doesn't it seem right there that like this crack in the ground maybe have formed after this flow? There's a little bit of a hint of it right there, and you kind of lose it right through there maybe. So it seems likely that the cracking was ongoing as the magma continued to flow through the area after the lava had stopped coming out. That's not an unusual thing to happen. Those are the upper 2 lava pads and fissures. And just off to the left here, going down a rift, are the next 2 fissures 3 and 4. 3 on this closer down to the right end, and 4 on the upper center here. The one that's still putting out gas on June 6th when this overflight occurred and this photograph was taken. So here, once again, you see that the fissure line is following that southwest rift area, and most of the flow is flowing to the south downhill. There's one in particular tongue that comes off here, extra distance to the south from this fissure that's offset. You see these fissures are not quite lined up. They're stepping to the left as they go down the rift here. So that's one view of it. You can see these flows actually joined together and fed the same pad of lava. And we'll look at this tongue that's sticking to the left here when we fly in a helicopter around the other side. Now it's down here at the bottom. And there is fissure 3 and fissure 4 putting out all of the fume. So those are the images of the fissures. They continue down the rift and notice quite a bit of ground cracking. See those ground cracks through there, cutting through all this ash and cinder and tephra that's usually windblown, windswept, coming off of the Ka'u Desert from previous ash explosions of Kilauea. So normally they fill in all the cracks, and so these are fresh cracks if you can see them open and nothing has washed in them yet. Pretty recent stuff there. There's the young ones, and you can see other series of ones all through here. These light colored hairline features on this photograph here. This is Pu'uko'a'e here in the background as well. So they keep flying. They actually look, if you look closely, some of these cracks are looking fairly big, so they make a closer approach. And here it is, a very wide crack. Right? They say that the cracks at their widest were 6.5 feet wide, but sometimes only a couple inches. The ones over here, perhaps. And so the hiking trail of the Ka'u Desert crosses not too far down over here, but this area of the trail is currently closed. So just a few more images before we take our break here. Let me show you guys that USGS has installed a new seismic station out at KOSM, which was a station that was already collecting gas and GPS data. So here they are, the eruption sites there in the background. You can see the landscape all around. This is what that sediment substrate usually looks like. Everything's just wind and water run to fill in all the cracks and make it smooth looking. Looking a little closer, there they are. They already have the solar panels and radio communication antenna in place. So they're just installing more wiring and perhaps data loggers and the instrument in the ground itself, with permission of the national park, of course. So here it is, still fuming when they're installing the station. And finally, looking into the hole, there they are. They've dug it all the way in. They bury the thing in the hole in sand to try to dampen any kind of noise vibrations, whether it's from the wind or rain, or this is not near a road, so you don't have to worry about that, but sometimes that is a concern there. So there it is in that hole packed in. You can see how they actually have a north arrow so they can align it geographically. They've got a center. The bubble looks right dead in the center right there. Right, and then they have other information there. We were trying to see if this serial number was anything we could find reference to anywhere, but you can actually see the serial number and IP address on there as well. Don't worry, it's safe. No one can damage it from up there. So, and just one more frame of the station data itself. So here it is, putting out data. Some earthquakes coming in today. So it is live. So a couple final ones here. They have also, let's see, shown some images of the lava that came out. This one I highlighted because you can see a combination of these fine Pele's hairs, like where the lava gets strung out like a cotton candy filament, mixed in with this, what they call pancake spatter bomb, where the lava lands and just flattens out from the weight, and it's a viscosity there. So that's one of the examples of the lava that they've shown down here. Let me just scroll down to that area. We've seen all these. There it is, as well as some other pieces of tephra they've collected for analysis. And it looks like they may have collected some of that ash that we saw in a dark cloud in the video, in the imagery last week, to try to understand what was happening with those little minor explosions during that brief fissure eruption down in the Southwest Rift. So we've seen previous maps, and we've seen the interferogram, the radar-based satellite data here, showing the extent of the intrusion down the rift. Last one to end on is going to be this image from Cosme on X, who has taken the Copernicus satellite data here and just overlaid it for us, the new eruption in infrared and in visible imagery. So that is our visual update on Kilauea here. We will switch to monitoring after our break. So I will pause now and pass it over to Dane. And I will also take a chance to say thank you to Dano, who is here, still interpreting for us by himself. And his arms are ready to fall off, and he'll likely have to step away there. Mahalo, Dano.
Thank you, Dano. Yeah, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank everybody for showing up today. We rely on viewers like you to help get this information out there. Like, subscriptions, and all the shares, all that stuff really does help. I'd like to bring on Lou, and we can also thank some other people as well. 1 second. Hey Lou, how you doing?
I'm good. Yep. Dano, you about ready to take a little extra break here when I start talking, because we'll roll some credits. And I did put out to everybody, show some sympathy, and maybe we can all pitch in for some biofreeze for you.
All right. Well, we get into our thank yous. Also start with the Puna Strong and Kilauea Recovery Grant programs, both facilitated by the county, but also Hawaii Community Foundation. So I want to thank them, as well as some of the donations that we've gotten recently. Lou, you want to?
Yep, I'll go ahead and hit that button. There we go. Dano, you can take a break. Here we go. Kilauea Recovery Grant, Puna Strong, as we just said. Ken, IE, Skagit Dennis, Winch 9, Cassie, James, All Breezy, Lisa, Volcano Nerd, Kathleen, JD, The Chocolate, Kimberly, Mark, Joshua, Laura May, Lori, Julie, Linda, Harry, Tom and Kathleen, Larry, Brian, Pat, Tiggy, Gustav, Kim, Momo, Jerome, Mary, Susan, Robert, Thomas, Lisa, Vicky, Gina,
They lost it. I was going to say you've been practicing.
No, only on Thursday.
Shane, Gary, Marilyn, Sharon.
That's my rule. Only on Thursday, when I get everything all back together. That's it. Also want to say, I'm going to drop a link here in a second to everybody. If you follow if you use the platform LinkedIn, we're only 124 followers away, so that we can live stream on that platform that we've been trying to do. I'll drop the link in a second for that. Go ahead and jump over there. We do post up on LinkedIn. I know some of you professionals out there use it, and help us out there. That's all I've got for tonight. Thanks again to Dano.
Yeah, I think we're only 40 subscribers away from 8,000 on YouTube as well.
Yeah,
which is
and
kind of
YouTube's
like
right there.
Just
So
right
if you're on Facebook or X or are we on Instagram tonight? Yes, we are.
Yeah.
Yep. Journey over to YouTube. We're trying to get to 10,000 on YouTube so that we can kick on our nonprofit button on there. So,
Yep.
Spread some
All
love
right.
for
Well,
us.
thank you, Lou.
Yep.
Appreciate it. And if anybody has any questions out there, we'll be getting to those at the end of the program, just so you know. All right. Well, thank you, Lou.
You're welcome.
All right. I'll bring back Phil on. There we go.
All right. So, yeah, thanks, you guys. Good job with that. Next, we'll look at Kilauea monitoring, and we'll go through the updates. We'll go through some of the signals and satellite imagery here. And then we'll talk about the relationship of this eruption to 1974 and a little bit to 1919, and we'll wrap it up after that. So we probably won't go quite as long today as usual, but that's all good here. So let's start off with USGS volcano notices, and put that here on the screen. Our most recent, let's go back to Saturday's update. So at that point in time, Kilauea volcano was not erupting. The eruption had ended, and incandescence from the fissure had decreased significantly over that previous day. Gas emissions had also decreased significantly. We're approaching background levels, while earthquake counts in the summit were elevated, and tremor was down to background levels. Inflation continued at the summit, and still they keep this caveat that renewed pulses of seismicity and deformation can result in new eruptive episodes within an area or elsewhere within the summit region. So that was the update on Saturday, where we're at 400 tons per day at that point in time. I'll move on to the following day on Sunday, where they announced that the eruption has ended. Weak incandescence was barely visible, and everything was decreased to background levels. We'll keep advancing forward here because things stay pretty similar. They update the SO2 from 350 to 400, or from 400 to 350 here later in a week. But just before that, they say that incandescence is no longer visible in nighttime images. Gas emissions to background levels. So it's not a whole lot of information in the day-to-day updates here that's changing. Right? They're just saying that the glow is ending, the gas is coming down, the tremor is coming down. And here's today's update where it says essentially that, right? There's no eruption, there's no glow. Gases are at your background, tremor is at background, earthquake counts are slightly elevated. So inflation around the summit continues. That is the long and short of it there. It's worth noting that the earthquakes are occurring also under the upper east rift and upper southwest rift, but that there is nothing happening in the lower east rift at all. So there is no increased threat to people. And I like seeing that they have now a whole dedicated section to the lower east rift zone observations and the updates now. Right? It's something we've made sure to make a point ourselves as well. So great to see that happening. So that is the text updates from USGS. We can go through some of the monitoring signals. Here is the Uwikuhuna signal at the summit, where you see over the last week, we've come from -5, we'll call it, to +6, so 11 plus microradians in a week, fairly steadily with a little bit of bumps. We're not seeing any big deflation inflation events right now. If there are any, they're just causing little wiggles rather than big troughs in our data here. So here is a more recent slowdown just over the last day or so. The lava depth has not changed at all within the summit, and I wanted to put this in here just to follow up from last week, because we noted that in October, when the first pulse of magma came through, it actually surfaced into that lava lake and cracked the surface a little bit. Did not emerge, did not actually erupt there, but then it moved into the southwest rift afterwards. And since then, has it happened again? And here, what I can play for you guys is this V2 camera for the last month now, just daytime images. And what we saw the last time was this crack over here was what widened. And if I stare at it, no matter how long I stare at this thing on loop, it is not moving at all. So I think that's good evidence to point out as well that we're not seeing that anymore, unlike what happened way back in October. It seems the pathway into the Southwest Rift is open. That would make sense. There weren't even any earthquakes towards the rift eruption last week. So looking at the earthquake counts, here is that post-eruption peak, just a little less than a week ago. And since then, we're still slightly elevated at over 50 earthquakes per day, but not nearly as high as we were previously. Here is depth versus time. Everything is in the shallow orange band here for the most part. We had seen a pulse of these slightly deeper earthquakes. They seem to have continued very sporadically, but there's nothing really persistent about them that we can see here. There's no clusters of them. They just seem to be happening at some random background rate that we can tell here. But still, this is likely showing the path of magma from the depths is still very healthy and robust coming up. There is our 1 week of earthquakes. Besides the summit regions, we still have Pahala deep earthquakes ongoing. South flank events, there is still some of those aftershocks of the bigger events last week. And in cross section, you can see that there is that deep pile of Pahala compared to the shallow Kilauea summit and upper rift zone events here. And these ones are the south flank ones off to the side. So here is the last month of data. So we looked at the last week. That was basically this. This is what follows that eruption, where it dropped way down, and you see very quickly it climbed back up. If you're curious, when you see these vertical lines, these vertical steps, those are the earthquakes registering. Sometimes the earthquake will shake the ground and the instrument just goes right back to where it was, and the line resumes where it was before. And sometimes it actually causes the instrument to move, and then it picks up from where it actually ended. And you see both examples within a short time there. And that was just likely following eruption, as magma was still pushing its way through into that southwest rift and beyond our eruption site. Where here it's breaking its way down some pathway to cause those events here. You can see that the deflation had already begun. The magma had already started to leave the area before these earthquakes occurred. So that's the pattern, right? And as I pointed out, we did not see any big deflation inflation events here in a recent week, unlike previous times this month. So there's the sand hill, and likewise we see that very quick resumption of steep inflation and a more recent slowdown. So magma is still accumulating in that southwest rift connector, upper southwest rift area, even as it seemingly was flowing into the rift for several days afterwards, right? So looking at this, maybe you would guess that maybe magma is flowing into that rift, maybe up to here. Let's zoom in so it's a little more clear, right? You see the slope changes right in there. And perhaps that is a sign that it stopped flowing in and started building pressure further up the rift following that. And we're seeing now pressure building up at that upper rift and in the summit within the Halamau area as well. Both those things occurring. So lava depth, we'll scroll past that, still flat. Depth time and earthquakes, we'll move past that one as well. And look at the monthly earthquake counts once again. So we've had previous cycles of earthquakes where they came up and quaked that Kauai area, South Caldera area, and did not cause an eruption. And you can see at just slightly higher levels last week, we did cause an eruption. So here we are since then, not as high as either of those two events within the last month, and just coming back down off of that little ramp up. Overall, earthquakes per week over the last year, the last week was high, and this week is low once again as we're still essentially recovering from that eruption. Over the last 5 years, this is interesting, earthquakes per month, we've had since October this elevated earthquake count because of this movement in the southwest rift and the south flank in the area, and the South Caldera and the Kauai fault zone, the upper east rift, and all the edges of everything that have been quaking all through here. And so you can see this clear step up, and if we take the average from October, the average I would draw it maybe somewhere in here. And it's clearly above this average from previous times back in there. So those are the earthquakes. The GPS, this is a 1-year plot. So every little circle is 1 day. And we're missing a lot of the last week here. So it's not updated on the online graph. The instruments often collect data all the time, but it's not uncommon that something between the instruments and the website doesn't go all the way through. So usually this fills back in at some point, and so we'll expect that to be more filled in the next time we look at this graph. Still, what you can see is that initial contraction following eruption, and what we'd expect to see now is it coming back up following the tilt and ground tilt. At Pu'u'o, we'd expect it to keep going down, just following that same pattern of contraction because there's been no sign of activity in the lower east rift zone. So those are the signals on Kilauea there. I thought we could just look at this once again. This interferogram INSAR image. In this image, we can look at the scale here. It's 1.5 centimeters per color range. So when you go and count, you can count, for example, there's from blue, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. So then you add all those up times the, well, actually, I think it's switching from up to down right in there somewhere, right? So maybe not quite that many, but maybe those 8 or so you would look at, and then you could calculate that times 1.5 centimeters and get a full range of change if you didn't have your GPS to look at, which is what we usually look at instead here. So we'll look at that in just a second, but just to give you some idea of how this actually fits in the rest of the volcano, I thought I would put it on Google Earth for you guys. So here it is overlaid on Google Earth. Let's see if I can, let's see here, which is the right map. This one. Off and on, I've got on here the 1974 December flow and a 1919 flow as well, right there. So you can see 2 previous Southwest Rift Zone flows and their locations in comparison, but here is our map. And on this map, here are the flows that occurred last week in the Southwest Rift, right? So what I was mostly curious when I was looking at this is, okay, we can see that the new eruption flows are very similar location to the 74 flows right in there. But I'm also interested to see how far down does this fringe of intrusion go all the way down here. Right? And you actually can see it about as far as Mauna Iki. And this is Mauna Iki right in here. These are the flows from Mauna Iki 1919 to 1920 right there. So that is maybe some down in here as well. In the later stages here, but you can see how far down it's actually getting in there. So if we look at the distance from this end all the way to the summit, that's about 7 miles or so, just to show you how long this feature is. And it didn't go in a straight line; it went more that way and jogged over. It seems like to hit the fissures on the way right in there. So that's just a little extra context to share how this actually fits into the previous context here. Something I like to do. So looking at the GPS then, once again, I should point out that these are not showing the most recent data. These are 2-year plots now, so the gap looks a little smaller, but that's because the plot's twice as wide. So we're missing a little bit of data here at the end. But we can still see the initial effects of that eruption. And overall, what you can see is that nothing is doing anything crazy. You can see the pattern of all the previous drops here from intrusionary pulses, interruptions as well, where Kahuna drops down. And you can see that again, and so does Byron's Ledge. And you see that same pattern as we saw in January across the board. But in some areas, like the outlet here, this station was still moving, starting to settle. You see the dots are starting to plot one on top of the other there. Starting to settle, but after that big jump there. And what I really wanted to get to is these southwest rift stations right in here. And even though they also seem to be getting closer together, you can see that they were still moving. In fact, the last time that this graph updated, this was still moving to the south and east and up, likely because magma was moving through the system there. KOSM this is the location where we have our new seismometer. That's the closest to that eruption site. It's 4 miles down the southwest rift. So right next to the eruption site in there, and right over that intrusion. And here you can see that the last time this plot updated, none of these dots were overlapping each other here. So this was clearly still moving. And in that case, the ground was dropping down. Right there, you can see. And here is where you might look at your GPS signal instead. You might see the top of this is at this 21 centimeter mark, 22 centimeter mark, somewhere in there. And the most recent data that it shows is down here at maybe 9. So you're looking at, what, 12 centimeters or so visible on this particular graph of vertical drop at that one station. That would correspond with that satellite INSAR image we just saw as well. So that is the most exciting part. We don't have anything else to really share, but what I can show after having said that is we don't see that pattern anywhere else. Everywhere else, everything seems to be clustering and plotting on itself. On the south flank, the Kilauea zone, down to the east rift, everything is just looking pretty normal apart from that southwest rift area. And I'll just quickly scroll up and through here to show you that. All right, that was the GPS. And so now we'll turn to our satellite and we'll look at the Mounts project imagery, which is producing these automatic INSAR images in addition to what we just saw released by the USGS. And so the most recent image looks like this. And so there is that similar view. We're cropped a lot more and most of the eruption is happening off the screen to the left here. But I thought since this is plotting every couple of weeks, for the most part, we could use this as a comparison and as a tool to go back in time to see how we got here. Because this is interesting, I think, right? And so here we are. And what I'll do is I'll come all the way back to our image from early February this year, where we had the last intrusion that looked kind of similar to that. I also went off the map in that direction. And you can see that it took a lot of magma from this summit area as well, right? Compared to, here's a one now. There's a little bit of fringe in here, but maybe a little bit smaller event, but similar pattern of magma moving into the southwest rift. Okay, so once again, February, this is February 21st from February 9th. This is usually 12-day, 2-week periods. And you can see, oh, wait, I went back. So here we go. Here's the intrusion from February 9th from January 28th, catching that intrusion. The very next frame is the one I was just at, this one where it starts recharging under the summit area first. Okay, fast forward 2 weeks. Now the inflation center has moved south to the Kilauea in there, and a little bit over to the southwest rift connector as well. Fast forward 2 weeks, and we are now more so in the summit region as well as the upper southwest rift. We'll advance again. And now we're back to the summit, being the center once again. And again, now we have more fringes, so a more intense episode of uplift, and it's centered in a Kilauea zone bounded by the east rift zone and the southwest rift connector over here as well. So you really can see this bouncing from the center to the south, to the southwest, to the southeast. That's the pattern of filling we've had in Kilauea. And here it goes back to the center, back to within the caldera near Hawaiian Magma. Now we're up to May 15th from May 3rd, the first half of May. So here we are. It goes back to the Kilauea from middle to end of May. And here we are, finally, the last couple of weeks that catches our eruption and where it flushes us the way through. So I thought it'd be interesting to just to step back through those one more time to just recap how we got here and how the magma really has building pressure and then moving through one area, moving into another area and inflating different centers. And then here it went just flushing down and just happened to find the area the previous intrusion caused a lot of ground cracks and was able to escape and leak out, even though most of the work was intruding 4 miles further than where it leaked out. The leaking was not the ultimate destination for most of that magma. It was a point further down the rift 4 miles away. So, okay, those are our satellite images, and that'll wrap up our monitoring segment here. Before we get to Mauna Loa, I thought we would talk about some of the context, right? And so I'm going to call this our volcano awareness presentation for this week to come back and look at these previous historical eruptions that we have. So here is our map that released by the USGS last week of our 2024 eruption with the yellow fissures and the red lava flows, but also plotted on here are previous important flows. Here's that 1971, yeah, and then the 1919, 1920. I think I said that wrong when I was on Google earlier. I was getting mixed up there. So there is a correct version. 71 is this little finger here, and Mauna Iki is that bigger pad down over there as well. And here's 74 from December, because 74 actually had 3 eruptions, of which one was out here, and one was in here, and one was over here. So this is the one we're talking about, the December 74 eruption. So going back to Mauna Iki over here, and we'll talk about 71 maybe a different time, but Mauna Iki here was a very interesting event. There is a map of where it's located. Or maybe the last map was better, so we'll just keep it moving here. And what was interesting about Mauna Iki was it had lots of different stages of eruption, and there's a whole presentation by Scott Rowland on Mauna Iki anniversary back in 2019 that we have on our channel if you're interested in the full story here. But there's lots of different stages of it, but essentially here is what happened. Prior to the eruption, there was a lava lake in Halema'uma'u. This is November 28th, 1919. The lava lake drains and likely goes into one of these cracks, because when they see the walls of the lava lake where it has drained, they see 2 cracks in the lower 120 meters of the southwest and northeast walls of the 180-meter deep pit. These cracks did not extend to the surface along the pit walls. However, there was a new fuming fissure on a caldera floor about 100 meters southwest of the rim of Halema'uma'u. So they think that that's the crack. That's concluded that the lava drained into that cavity through that crack, and it went down into the southwest rift somewhere over here. That what then happened in the next panel right here is from deep storage, magma reestablishes a pathway to shallow storage, refills the lava lake within the next few days, starts refilling it until they start seeing lava now going into that crack they had previously seen and moving down the rift zone until it actually erupts at Mauna Iki in that stage 1. That's what these little purple things represent here. So they have then some iterations of magma being cut off from shallow to deep storage, and eventually a deep storage pathway occurring that bypasses shallow storage to Mauna Iki. And this is why I brought this up, as this is a point that's interesting to me in the context of what happened this year. Is in this case here, they drew it in 3D right down on here. They're presuming in this interpretation that that deeper pathway is also going underneath the main caldera and then going out to the rift zone that way, right? But when we look at our map of what we have going on here, and we saw that the pathway of lava was actually down through here and then over, and all good, we saw 74 do that. But now we know that we have cracks, and the cracks go, let's bring up the other one. Where's this thing? The cracks go all the way down to here, all the way down in there, right? So and we talked about how the dike is all the way to Mauna Iki. So it's actually showing us that there's another pathway, perhaps slightly further to the south, that leads to that area. And I don't know that we know or will ever know exactly the dynamics of Mauna Iki in 1919. But it is interesting now to see that this particular dike is actually sitting in between, and I didn't maybe say this explicitly in this image here, but it's sitting in between these 2 other pathways that are previously documented of erupting. So back to here. And to this one, right? So perhaps this pathway could be more in this direction like that, and accomplish the same goal. And why would you suspect that until maybe this year? And so I'll be curious to hear some thoughts on that someday from these researchers. So that's just one aspect of that 1919 eruption. As magma was moving in its later stage down towards Mauna Iki through those cracks, they actually saw cracks opening and moving down the rift. And so here they have that plotted by date. The rate was about 0.5 kilometer per day. So you see here, November 30th was that very first fissure that was exposed with draining of lava. And then really it starts back up on the 15th of December with cracks opening up, the 15th, on the 21st, on the 22nd, on the 23rd, on the 24th, on the 25th, and eventually would erupt on the 31st, further down, right? So that's why this series of when you see cracks opening down a rift from a current eruption site, and the cracks are 6.5 feet wide at the surface, you still hold your breath a little bit, because we've seen cracks sometimes take a couple of weeks to propagate all the way down in an area as magma moves through and continues deforming the ground above it. Right, so that's a little bit of insight from 1919 to share today. And then one more thing, and we'll go a little bit more in depth here, is 1974. We mentioned before how the 74 vents line up more in trend with a Kauai fault system, but they are actually trying to take a direction that's more parallel to the southwest rift. So it's an in-between zone right in there, and that's similar to what we just saw in 2024. So there is that eruption map, and in that case, in 1974, so here once again, December 31st is this southwest rift area right in here. The one before that was September 19th within the summit region, 74. And here, July of 74 was all through here. So focused on the December event. These fissures are labeled with letters in order of their opening. So it was A, and then B, and then C, and then D, and then E. So it bounces around from the central point to start. But then it goes down a rift here, F, G, H, I, down a rift there at the end as the magma pushes its way down the rift. Right, and there's another part of the story that follows this eruption. And here's where these comparisons are really interesting. So we've seen from the USGS descriptions here that the 74 eruption produced 10 million cubic meters of magma. Ours produced maybe only 0.1 million cubic meters of magma. 74 was 6 hours. In our case, in 2024, it was 8.5 hours. Both of them had very thin flows, but in 74, it covered 3 square miles. In 2024, only 1/4 of a square mile. So there are some similarities, but the similarities, when you start looking more deeply, are less than the differences. The similarities are the location, the brevity of it, and how thin the flows were. And really that kind of maybe some of the cracking that's occurring as well surrounding the eruption. That's a lot of it too. There's also an intrusion associated with both events, right? So to get to that part of it, let's continue in 74. Here are the cracks that were mapped out in 74, along with eruption fissures. So fissures and cracks all around there, so similar ground cracking. But what we'll do now is turn to professional paper 1806. This is 200 years of magma transport and storage at Kilauea, and look at the 74 era. And so it's a very brief description in here. This all follows the Mauna Ulu eruption, which went from 69 to 74, ending in the spring, followed by an eruption in July and September, like in the summit region, before there was inflation continuing for the southwest rift. So a series of inflationary intrusions beneath both the upper east rift zone and the seismic southwest rift zone occurred between 6 October and 20 December 1974. And so we're talking about how there's this background activity occurring with earthquakes in the upper east rift and the upper southwest rift for 3 months. Sound familiar? A third but much larger eruption intrusion on a long segment of the seismic southwest rift occurred during December 31st, 74. It was preceded by a deep magma supply swarm on 24th of December, followed by an upper east rift inflationary signal. So deep earthquakes occurred about a week ahead of that eruption. Interesting to note that as well. We had a couple of those, but maybe not a week. It might have been 2 or 3 weeks out. Followed by east rift inflationary intrusion on 25th of December, right? And extra earthquakes in the Upper East Rift and Kauai zone as well. Inflation expands to the Southwest Rift, December 27th or 30th. And then coincident with that eruption, with that short eruption, seismicity moved down the seismic Southwest Rift and onto the western south flank. Intrusion continued for a week following the eruption and gradually tapered off over the following 6 weeks. It went on for 6 more weeks after that. Heightened seismicity beneath the south flank and the magma supply regions, deeper than 10 kilometers, persisted up to the time of the 75 earthquake. And so bringing up this earthquake actually is a interesting point because, in fact, this eruption may have been an important prequel to allowing the south flank to move, to allowing in the western part, that then maybe later allowed the central south flank by Kalapana to move. In 75, that was a magnitude 7.7 earthquake. And following that is what allowed magma to then intrude the rift zone past Mauna Ulu to establish a spot to erupt at Pu'u'u for 35 years. So this eruption that we had in 2024 has got a lot of work to do to get to that same situation. As I said, more differences than similarities so far, but it's been less than 2 weeks yet, right? And so there's time for things to evolve still and for us to watch and wait what happens here. As we said in 74, it went on for another 6 weeks as well there. So following the end of the large 74 intrusion in the seismic Southwest Rift Zone, there were several suspected deep intrusions in the central south flank, likely that Kauai area. And then they have continuing adjustments of south flank earthquakes occurring there as well, leading up to what's officially a 7.2, initially has, I think, been reclassified as 7.5. And if you look at the literature from seismologists, they actually call it 7.7 on November 75 there. And that was the next time Kilauea was actually going to erupt, was a brief eruption due to an earthquake from 1975. And so even with all its activity in 74, it took a long time for the volcano actually to repressurize and actually erupt again. And it wasn't from pressure, it was actually from pressure and the earthquake breaking the ground to allow the escape for it to like fizzle out for a single day. That 75 eruption was something akin to just like having a bottle of soda pop and just like shaking it and then punching a hole and just letting it fizz out a little bit there, right? Like it was like having, it was an old lava lake that was already crusted over, like what we have today. Had a crust, it had edges at the bottom, but it had a gooey middle. And we shook it enough and cracked it, and then we were able to like fizz out the gas and cause a short eruption from the middle of that thing. And afterwards, the ground kind of sagged afterwards. So that's what happened following 74, in case anyone's curious, but it's look a little more visually. Here is their typical kind of plot. If you haven't seen these, this is the time on the bottom here. So December 74 is this dotted line right through there, that eruption site. And there are other eruptions in 74 intrusions marked all through here as well. The colors on here, the one that matters is the pink. The pink is seismic Southwest Rift and a western south flank all through there. And so what you can see is that Southwest Rift earthquakes were building up for months ahead of time. So let's see, this is back in July of 74 there. So July, here's the October period when it really started off in earnest, building up to that event. And they tailed off over 6 weeks to there. Very little occurring until we have that earthquake eruption in 1975 at the far end of the graph here. Maybe maps are more useful. I thought they were personally. So here is a couple of maps. Let's start off with the one on the left here. This is the 74 eruption from July. So the summit eruption only. And just going to show that even with their summit eruptions, they were still having quite a bit of Upper East Rift Zone seismicity at the time, as well as Caldera seismicity. They, at the time, are interpreting this as Upper East Rift intrusions, which they may well be. But I think in the context of what we've seen with the whole Kauai fault block moving, they could also have some component of Kauai movement in there as well. Just my personal opinion on that there, but I'd be curious to learn more about that. On the right, this is the first panel of the 31st December 74 Southwest Rift eruption. This is just December 24th through 26th, the build up to the eruption. So the deep earthquakes are the stars occurring, this deep pathway to Kilauea there. And the earthquakes are occurring in the Upper East Rift and Caldera areas right through there. This is still the build up. Still building up here. This is 27th to 30th of December, when there was what they call inflationary intrusion beneath both upper southwest rift and upper southeast rift. There it is, southwest and southeast, and still some caldera events occurring. So I thought this was reminiscent of the maps we're seeing today. Useful to look at that in context. All right, so here is where it diverges. And so what they're showing now is in blue pre-eruption, in orange during eruption, and in green after the eruption. Remember, 6 weeks after the eruption is the green. So during eruption is the orange, eruption is occurring right in here. That's that signal right there. But during and after that, the earthquakes continue migrating further down the southwest rift to this southwest part of the south flank. And it looks like you actually have some south flank movement in the southwest that moves off over here, Makaya, towards the ocean. This is more similar to what we saw back in the end of January when we were tracking this as well, right? We saw that the south flank had made maybe similar movement then, but it didn't do quite as much as 74. And maybe we're seeing this eruption now as a consequence, a part, like a later chapter of that same sequence. But this is the interesting part here where it actually only erupted 6 hours, kept earthquaking down, and then it moved the south flank. And as of right now, this is not happening in Kilauea this time, right? So there is a pretty important difference there. And so finally, here's all the earthquakes all plotted together. And what you can see is they also had south flank events over here, south of the Kauai, in the Kauai area, right? Some within the Kauai as well, but these stars are all the deep pathway ones, magma feeding in from deep, then dispersing shallow, maybe building up through here and flushing out the southwest and causing all of that extra cloud of earthquakes from this south flank movement right through there. So that's the context there of 74. And like I said, we don't have any answers here. It's just the discussion of all the context surrounding it, but you can form your own conclusions and try your own parallels and inferences here of what you think might happen next, since no one really knows, right? And we're just trying to lay out some possibilities and use history as a key to the present, as geologists are keen to do here. So that is our volcano awareness presentation. I will now quickly switch over to wrap up with Mauna Loa, which there's not much to share on Mauna Loa, but here are the signals that tilt for the last week. Earthquakes very shallow and infrequent. Longer term, the 1 month tilt, not showing much change. And these signals are, I would suspect, being influenced by both tidal cycles and by the southwest rift of Kilauea adjusting and moving. Kilauea's south flank rests against Kilauea's southwest rift there. So it certainly can have an influence. It's not a major one, but it could be enough to cause some little wiggles in the tilt plot here. We haven't had any deep earthquakes in Mauna Loa in some time, just the sporadic background. It seems like it's actually slowed down a little bit. And as far as this inflation, this earthquakes all around Mauna Loa, it's still filling, but it seems to be stabilizing more so than before. Earthquakes per day over the last month, the maximum was 4 within that summit region. So not much to talk about here. They're occurring pretty slowly up there. And in the context of the deep intrusion last year and of the last 5 years building into our eruption, we're really at almost nothing in comparison. There are earthquakes for the last week, month, and year for comparison, not nearly as dense as the Kilauea plots. And a GPS, not quite updating to the very right end of the graph once again, but still showing how we're extending north and south of distance across Mauna Loa's caldera, Mokuaweoveo, and very slightly still rising the instruments. So it's spreading apart and rising, right? It's like that's the inflation process right there. So that is Mauna Loa. And one last thing to point out here is a volcano watch this week. The USGS has authored this article on the 2014-2015 Pahoa lava crisis. It's been 10 years. It's been a decade. So here we are, June 2024, looking back 10 years to the flows that were coming through into Pahoa town. And so we won't go into too much detail on this, but this was the event that preceded 2018 that alerted lower East Rift Zone communities. Was kind of like a shot across the bow there that Kilauea could reach that area. Gave us some insights into the use of social media during eruptions, of public meetings from the USGS, of the response, of how they were using the alert notices and all of that, of how lava could actually use these cracks. And we just talked about the Mauna Kea eruption in 1919, finding a crack and moving all the way down the rift through some crack. People could actually see it from the surface and walk along and look in a crack and see the lava going. And had it not been as forested, that was the same story moving east in 2014. Lava found a crack from the June 27th fissures that were northeast of Pu'o'o. They had made a perch pond. That perch pond overflowed, kind of collapsed, fed a big flow that then found the upper end of this crack. It pours in this crack. It flows through the crack roughly 3 miles underground to within a mile of Ka'ohe homesteads, where it leaves the crack, starts flowing downhill towards Pahoa at a fairly slow rate, actually, honestly, right, compared to 2018 and what we've seen since then. So we had a lot of weeks and a lot of months to meet and talk about how fast was it going, and when would it actually get here, and what was it doing, and where was it going to get, and should we do this, and should we do that, and let's build this emergency road and that emergency road. And what do you want to say, Dane? It sounds like you're ready to say something here.
Yeah, so the thing that I always was or more confused about recently about that flow is after watching 2018, we saw how fast in the cracks lava could drain back underneath the ground. So like, was there's nothing that's watertight in these basalt rocks. So were they able to retain, obviously it was able to retain more than it needed to be able to make a lava flow, but was that contributing to draining inside that crack to slowing it down some? Or what's your thoughts about it being able to traverse underground like that and pop back out and not disappear underground forever? Because we've seen that too.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, and I think there's cracks and there's cracks is maybe my answer, my short answer, right? Now, so let me elaborate, right? Like, what's a fissure? A fissure is actually, in my mind, it's a crack that lava is using to get out from underground to the surface. So when lava is erupting and it forms a new crack, that crack is actually extending all the way down to the rift zone, which is likely going to be down a half mile, a mile down. It's a continuous crack all the way down. So when eruption is over, that crack is still open all the way down, and lava, when it can drain to a pretty deep spot in there, right? And that then hardens, and eventually the crack is not as deep as it was because it's drained of lava now, and there's lava in it, and it's hardened after some time, and it's just not as deep anymore because it's not connected to the magma pathway anymore. So if you have a crack that's driven, let's say, from the top down, where you have like the flank of the volcano is moving and the top's moving a little faster than the bottom, let's say, and like so he starts pulling apart like a stack of papers or something, right? Then maybe that acts more like a lava tube because it's got a distinct bottom, right? It's maybe a very tall and skinny lava tube, but then allows it to actually maybe retain, like actually it will freeze around its edges and retain its heat in the middle part like a lava tube does. And then it actually may not have a path to go deep down if that crack didn't form from a rift zone eruption, for example. Maybe it did. And maybe there are spots where the crack was deeper than others. Maybe we're lucky that unlucky that this lava flow caught one that actually could use so efficiently for all those 3 miles. It was continuous and not that blocked, apparently. Nothing was blocking it. Didn't hit a snag in a way anywhere, right? At least not for long. So there's cracks and there's cracks is my answer there. With a little discussion, and yeah, I don't know the details of that crack, and I've never seen it with my own eyes apart from my helicopter on the East Rift Zone there. So I've never looked in and see like how deep does it look, or where other cracks are nearby, and what if I got on that one instead of this one, and that'd be cool stuff to do. But we've been busy, right? So,
yeah.
So that's 2014. Yeah, this is posted on our network if you'd like to go and check it out in more detail, right? This in the context of that was a 61E flow, which then was followed by F, and then eventually G being the last one that we'll put out before collapsing in 2018 with that lower East Rift eruption. So it's all connected here, and they do a good job summarizing the events of the eruption here, and thought we could just share some of our own perspective of the social side of that, right, for the public, because a lot of people in 2018 were like, well, it was just here a few years ago. And in fact, the Hawaii Tracker group started off not with that name, as a lava update group for 2014. It's a lava crisis. So that's a little bit of our own origin story there as well. And we've then gone from that to Hawaii Tracker Facebook group to starting our own nonprofit. And now we are HVERI, the Hawaiian Volcano Education and Resilience Institute. And our mission from 2018 to improve disaster preparedness, response, and recovery through volcano education, and having a good distribution network for volcano information education, for emergency alerts, helping civil defense, resilience hubs, the whole 9 yards there. So that's Volcano Watch this week. I do have a couple of community highlights to note here. So the national park has reopened their areas as eruption came to a halt. They do have the Mauna Iki and Ka'u Desert Trails closed. Ka'u Desert Trail is closed beyond the footprints exhibit, right? Otherwise, they have already reopened Ka'aha campsite at the coast, Devastation Trail, Kanakako'i, and more recently, Hilanapali Road. Kula now, let's see, I had to practice this earlier, so if I can get in there here. Kulana Okuaiki Campground, the footprints exhibit, and Pepeyao Cabin. So that is the update from the park. The park does, on their website, still note volcanic gas closures for Mauna Iki and Ka'u Desert Trail past the footprints exhibit. There is still construction ongoing. We've entered June. This is the first of the busier months at Kilauea Summit from visitation. So maybe more crowded with less areas for everyone to spread out there. So time your visits wisely if you're local and can. And still closures Mauna Loa above the Red Hill Cabin, resulting from the 2022 eruption still. And we'll see if that opens within 2 years of it ending or not here. We still have some months to go, but maybe that'll inspire someone to try. Right? So not erupting, vestibule activity. That's what's going on around the park. There is events as well. We are beyond our capacity to cover these, I believe, in the next couple of weeks. But there is a presentation coming up on Tuesday, Salt Gatherers of Hawaii, by Summer Roper Todd, Park Cultural Resources archaeologist. And then the next day, on Wednesday, there is a hula performance by Unu Lau under Kumuhula Pele Kayo. So that should be interesting and entertaining as well. That is it. I'll pass it to you, Dane.
All right. Well, we do have some questions here if you want to just dive into those and get them out of the way. We got a few good ones. So the first one is from Richard, who asked, did the lava from going to the most recent eruption come from a magma chamber above or below sea level, or a little bit of both?
Yeah, so it's, the magma chambers, magma reservoirs, we sometimes like to call them, because this maybe not quite a balloon shape, and it's maybe a network like a web instead, but whatever you call it, is likely to be just below sea level, actually. And there are paths in the rift zone that come all the way to the surface, and so clearly comes across that area, right? But usually we're talking about below sea level, right? Rift zone being half mile down, to a mile down, so maybe bordering that region, right? What's 1 mile is about 5,000 feet, half mile 2,600. Volcano summit elevation is 4,000 feet, so maybe it's slightly above sea level at the top of it.
Yeah,
but mostly below. Right?
Mostly below.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, it's a good question. It helps us imagine where things are. And
yeah,
where
right.
From.
Right.
Yeah.
All that kind of stuff does matter.
Right. I remember listening to Don Swanson. And you stand on Kilauea, you look at Mauna Loa. Mauna Loa is a lot taller, and its magma chamber is deep under its summit as well. But because it's so tall, that depth ends up being around at eye level from Kilauea. So then, so look at Mauna Loa, and eye level is about the top of that magma chamber, above sea level in the case of Mauna Loa.
Well above, yeah.
So it definitely varies. Yeah.
Right. Matt asks, is Ocean View community in danger of ever getting a lava flow?
Absolutely, yes. It's only a matter of time. Ocean View is somewhere we would like to collaborate more with, right? There's part of Ocean View, that northeast part, that actually is Zone 1. Rift Zone goes through there, where they have a quarry and they've been mining out a lot of the cinder from that area. That's Rift Zone itself. Zone 2 is right downhill from there. The slopes, the streets, everything Ocean View is not great as far as direct lava down like a pinball machine through there. And so I really would like to see more community preparedness. I'd like to see, maybe even we can be involved somewhat in helping with community draft emergency plans and all of that, but something needs to happen. I have never heard of a emergency drill in Ocean View, but I don't live there, so I don't know for sure, right? But like, we should be practicing evacuations from there because of the traffic and the limited paths in and out. If something were to happen, there's a lot of work we need to do in Ocean View still, right? I still believe that if Magma had gone there in 2022, we would have been in serious trouble.
Right. If you look at population, like density, as well as exposure, Ocean View is the worst. It's the most at risk in those, with those considerations in play. The only comparable one to it was Kapoho, and there's the 3 houses left from there from the 2018 eruption. So it took out 98% of the place, 99% of the place. So we don't expect that bad a thing to happen in Ocean View. It'd be more like it comes through one section and comes through quickly, as opposed to 2018, which was somewhat slow but wide. All right.
Yeah. So I mean, there are a lot of nuances, right? Like, we were in Ocean View looking at, if you're on a 1907 flow, you're on higher ground. That's probably useful. It's probably helpful, because a flow might be coming down a steep enough slope that it might just go into that little valley and not go over the 1907 flow. So high ground might be better. So
flow feature.
But there's a lot of recent flows in that area. You gotta look back, past is a key to the present. Just look around you. There's lava flows everywhere through there. So certainly be careful, be prepared.
Linda asks, how many sensors stations are there? Lots.
A lot. So let's see here. I can pull up a map.
Maybe just show the map would be the best way.
Way up to here. Okay, so let's see if I can make this a little bigger, like I prefer.
And hopefully it doesn't crash.
Okay, so we see all the earthquakes there, right? Let's zoom it out a little bit, and what we'll do is come to the instruments and let's click on. Well, let's take off the earthquakes. Here, let's see instruments. Let's go on cameras, GPS, gas sensors, infrasound, seismometers, and tilt meters.
Then you can click on each one to pull up information or what it's showing, or
when I show you guys lots of GPS, like I'm pulling them from here and I'm just compiling them, so I don't have to go and click all this stuff all the way through and look at them one at a time. I like to look at them side by side. So great question, Linda. But there's a lot. Kilauea is, in fact, I'd say Kilauea, Mauna Loa is getting there now too. Are some of the most the best monitored volcanoes on the entire planet, and studied for a long time, Kilauea especially. So it's still a place where we're even deploying new instrumentation, right? And not only do we have these permanent instruments in the ground, we saw last summer and the summer before several campaigns where they bring a whole bunch of other instruments, put them all over the volcano, then pick them all up after a few months and take them all away again after they collected all their data. So there's a lot going on with instrumentation. We have a lot of data to look forward to for many years to come.
All right, final question here from Bill, who asks, if or when there is ever more substantial eruption on the Southwest Rift Zone, would it be expected to be directly tied to changes at Halemaumau as the East Rift Zone was in, say, 2018 or previously?
Yeah, absolutely yes. It's just as connected. I think of them as, one is the Southeast Rift Artery and one is the Southwest Rift Artery, but they're both parallel coming from that magma chamber going out, right? So that's how I think of it. And we saw examples from 1919 when lava went in the Southwest Rift, the lava lake drained before it refilled. And so that's where the caveat comes in, right? What happened in 74 that was similar to now is we had extra magma coming into the volcano. When you have extra magma coming into the volcano, then it can push up and its way through. You can actually have it being draining down and refilling at the same time, where you maybe don't notice quite as drastic an effect unless you're looking very closely and you notice, well, this state was draining, the next state was filling, then it did this, and then it did that, and that's part of what we like to dig into for those of you who can stand us for an hour and a half each week here.
All right. Well, I think we got through the questions. We had one more from Facebook. Yvonne asked, can it really already have crystals with a hand lens? Can you already see them from the January intrusion? I thought it needs more time to grow.
Yeah, it's interesting, Yvonne. When I was in school, which is likely when you were in school too, like we were taught that it might take years for those crystals to grow. I have not kept as close a track, but what I remember hearing following the 2018 eruption is that they feel like in some of those areas, the rinds and crystals might have grown as little as 40 days, I want to say.
Oh, wow.
So a matter of weeks.
Faster.
So I think it's like if you hit the right conditions, they can really grow fast. And I think that's the kind of thing they're looking for. So the core might be different, might have been from somewhere else. And yeah, but if they're, obviously they're growing. So what they're seeing with their eye, the outside of it may well be from then. Right? But I will have to defer to the geochemists on that because I have not kept track of those modeling studies and all that. And it's been a big question for a long time. Like, how long does it actually take when you see crystal? Like, what's really going on? And I think the new techniques of laser ablation, shooting a laser at each of those different pieces of the rings of the olivine crystal and saying this is the actual section that grew in this 40 days and everything else is actually older. That one might have been a couple years old and that one might have been older than that. And they can kind of trace its way back into the middle of the crystal. So, but yeah, maybe not the whole thing, but some rind of it, maybe, but we'll put it that way, might be more likely to have been a growth, right? So then you can pick hairs and say, well, the crystal is partly grown. Yeah, I think that's what they're talking about.
All right. Well, very good. I think that gets us through all the questions and everything. For those that don't know, Phil will be taking a little bit of time off, so we will have a little bit of different content for you. Still be doing our volcano summaries, still talking about Kilauea and Mauna Loa, but a little bit different twist. Lou, Two Pineapples, will be joining me to fill in the spot for a little while, fill in the hot chair until and Phil will be able to give us some summaries a little bit later on. But yeah, for the beginning, it'll be Lou and I manning the station, and yeah, we'll see you in a little while. And yeah, just want to thank you for all the work you've been putting in and getting these updates done in the same time. So yeah, I know I've been busy. I know you're busy, really busy as well. So appreciate everything.
I was sleeping on vacation, right? And I feel like I've earned it by this point, right? But yeah, you guys got a lot of cool stuff planned. I think I'll look forward to watching it as well. You guys are following up on some stuff from last year. Yeah. I don't know how much you want to tease any of that, but some cool stuff coming up.
I'll just go ahead and announce it next week. We're going to be redoing the AI eruptions and fake disasters that Lou and I created a year ago, and with Midjourney and all the AI models for image generation that are out there, the top ones, and we'll be going back through them and seeing how well they've progressed. We're going to run the same prompts again. We're going to see if we can get these things looking more realistic, more believable, and just see what we can do.
Lou, you want to jump in and say anything too? If you do, feel free.
Yeah,
but otherwise, yeah, that's next week. There he is.
You just had to spoil it, didn't you?
It's kind of like not one of those things we want to be a surprise because then you might believe it.
Right. That's true. No,
we'll have a giant warning sign again saying AI generated imagery, don't believe fake news, and all that kind of stuff.
That's right. We did have to create those before, didn't we? That's right. Phil, you had a great vacation, huh?
Yeah, I'm actually making guys a banner that says AI image, not real, or something like that. Yeah. Let me know.
I think we have one from last year, didn't we? Because we decided we needed that up there.
Yeah, we had it last year. Mm-hmm. But yeah, thank you, and yeah, I think we can get into our ending sequence here, huh?
yeah, so I just mentioned, yeah, you guys will be, it'll be 3 weeks. That week in the middle, I'll try to come back and give you guys a little more of a summary. And if something does happen between now and then, I will do my best to come in and contribute as I can as well. But thank you guys for holding down the fort. And yeah, hope you guys enjoyed our new intro video. Thank you, Dane, for getting that together.
Yeah.
Some more of the highlights of our recent promotionals. Yeah, Lou's involved in that too. And yeah, with that said, we'll turn to our outro after we say goodbyes. So from HVERI, for Lou Ator up there, Dane DuPont, I'm Philip Ong. Aloha, everybody.